Hello. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Hot Mess Life Coach Season 6, Episode 6, Part 1. This week, we're going to be talking about, I will briefly be talking about the fear of rejection, but we're going to just give it a second until we are live on Instagram as well. Okay, Instagram is always a little bit behind schedule. There we are. Okay, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Hot Mess Life Coach. Morgan is not going to be with us today because I guess it's apropos as we're talking about the fear of rejection. The app has rejected Morgan and it is not letting her into the room today. Whenever she comes in the room, it boots me out. And whenever I go back in the room, it boots her out. So I'm doing a little solo trip on the fear of rejection. And I'm just going to talk briefly about it, tell a little bit of a story about how it has affected me. But then next week, once we have the technology fully figured out, Mo and I will go and do a deeper dive on the fear of rejection and everything that pertains to. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in. I want to first start by saying the fear of rejection is universal. Even if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I don't struggle with that. Okay, that's great. And it's a deeply embedded part of our evolution, because fear of rejection is linked to, at a deep level from early on, our survival. Our ability to survive was linked to our ability to thrive in community, to our ability to join and belong to tribes, and to our ability to get along well in those tribes. So if we were rejected from the tribe, our ability to survive plummeted drastically. And so the fear of rejection is evolutionarily inborn within us. And the other thing to understand about the fear of rejection, it's like a fear of social exclusion, but it triggers a grieving process when we're rejected. So it's not just about overcoming fear. It's actually about grieving the loss of a paradigm that we held dear that no longer feels or seems true to us. So, the paradigm of I have total acceptance from this person, and then boom, you're rejected. So that whole paradigm falls away. So it's not only that you have to work through not fearing rejection so that you can behave in the way that you want to show up in relationships, but you also have to work through the emotions that come up when you are rejected. You grieve the loss of a self-image that's intact in relation to the aspect of you that was rejected. So fear of rejection is one thing, and then there's the process of grieving and healing from the rejection as it happens. So the issue with fear of rejection and why it's such an important one to understand and to talk through is it can become a self-reinforcing loop, similar to some of these other ones. Like there was an article in Very Well Mind on rejection sensitivity in 2023. And what it was talking about was how people who are more sensitive to rejection will misinterpret behaviors of others that are innocuous, or they will read more into a tone of voice that wasn't really in the tone of voice, or they'll make a mountain out of a facial expression molehill and then interpret that as someone being annoyed with or rejecting or judging them. And so it's called attention bias. And when we have a fear of rejection, we behave in such a way that we see the potential for rejection everywhere. And so our fear of rejection actually becomes the self-reinforcing loop where we end up feeling and experiencing rejection even when rejection itself isn't present. And so that understanding is why it's worth knowing how this fear operates in us. Even if we think of ourselves as a person who doesn't have a fear of rejection, we do want to detect where inside us this self-reinforcing loop might be playing out so that we can heal it, so that we can own it, so that we can calm it down. I am very well acquainted with rejection. I am a writer and I am a filmmaker. And so I have been rejected multiple times over and over and over again. My articles have been rejected more times than they've been published. My films have been rejected from festivals more times than they've won. Yet I'm an award-winning filmmaker, so I can still say that. And at the same time, I had to endure piles and piles and piles of rejection in order to get there. And that is professional rejection. That's been challenging. It's very challenging. And there's also personal rejection that can also be challenging. And that's a whole different level of rejection. So on the professional side, one thing that has helped me is there was a story I heard about Stephen King, who, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's a writer, pretty successful. And before his success, he was sending his query letters to agents trying to get his manuscripts published. And he had rejection letters. Every time he got a rejection letter, he hung it up on this thumbtack on his bulletin board. And so he would just keep putting all the rejection letters there as like a motivator to remind him, like, okay, I'm just going to keep going. And then he got so many rejection letters that he had to change the thumbtack to a nail. And so he changed it to a nail and he kept hanging more and more and more rejection letters. It got to the point where before he ever had anything published in any kind of real way, he had changed the nail into a railroad spike. And so he was hanging rejection letters on the railroad spike. So the amount of rejection that one has to endure and go through in order to achieve something meaningful and worthwhile to them on the other side can sometimes seem like an Everest, like a Mount Everest. But the fear of rejection is the thing. That's where it's within the fear of rejection that the issue happens, where we hold ourselves back, because the fact of being rejected, it just is what it is. We can be rejected by one person and then move on with our lives in another direction. But the fear of rejection and then the wounding that comes as a result when we are rejected are what hold us back. It's not actual rejection. Back in the day, when we needed the tribes to survive, the actual rejection could have led to a lack of survival, like a real danger. Now it's not the rejection that leads to that. It's all the mind stuff around it, right? It's okay. You can be rejected from a meetup group. You just join another one, right? So it's like it's different now. Like it's not linked to our need to survive, but on some level within our consciousness, it still feels very much at that level of a fever pitch. And that's because on some deeper level, sometimes the fear of rejection is triggering in us something that we think is true. So we're buying into the truth, quote unquote, of what somebody has said. Somebody rejects me. And then I think, oh, that hurts because I truly am unlikable, or I truly am unworthy. And if I feel likable and lovable and worthy, then it doesn't matter to me if you reject me, right? So it's not the rejection, it's the state of being. It's how vulnerable I am to the rejection and what we can do about it. Mo and I, when she is not rejected by Restream next week, we will talk a lot more detail about what ways that we can cope with rejection and ways that we can move through rejection. But I just want to leave you guys with one small thing, which is it's about the basic steps that we've been talking about in many of the episodes. Bring your awareness to what you're feeling, and then bring skepticism to the thought storms that come up around it. Because when we're feeling emotions, the emotions are the truth. They're valid because they're a direct experience. Like, I'm feeling rejected, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling wounded, right? That's the truth. But all the thought storms that come up around the rejection aren't the truth. They're made of language. And so we want to accept the truth of how we feel, but bring healthy skepticism to the story being spun up around how we feel. Oh yeah, I feel lonely, I feel hurt, I feel wounded. But then the story is, that's because you're not likable. That's because you're not valuable. That's because everything that you've ever thought about yourself negative is true, right? That's a story. The story is categorically false. The emotions are true. They're true because you're experiencing them, not true because they indicate anything about your meaning or your depth or your wholeness. They're just the experience of what you're going through. And so become aware of your experience, tell yourself the truth about it, and then bring skepticism to the thought storm that comes up in relation to the feelings that you're feeling. And then bring intention to it. What do I want to do about this? How do I want to show up for this feeling and this thought storm? And our knee-jerk reaction in the way that we want it to show up, usually the intention that we want to bring is like, stop being that way, knock it off, get it together, because that's what culture has taught us. But instead, we want to bring to our rejection something that it has never felt before, which is our acceptance. We don't usually want to accept parts of us that feel less than, or wounded, or problematic, or traumatized. But with rejection, the healing balm is going to be lavish acceptance and allowing it to be there, allowing yourself to feel what you feel, but doubting the thoughts and the stories that feeling comes with. So I'll leave it there for today. Super short, just 10 minutes, because since Mo was rejected by the software, we're going to keep it brief today, and we're going to do Fear of Rejection Part 2 next week. So mark your calendars, stay tuned, and if the software will cooperate, we will be back for our full half hour next Friday. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed. Much love, everybody. Thank you.